Yet for all its brilliance, the Abbasid Caliphate was not immune to decline. By the 10th century, the empire began to fracture. Regional governors known as emirs gained increasing autonomy. Dynasties like the Bayts in Persia and the Fatimids in Egypt broke away, establishing their own rival centers of power. The caliphs in Baghdad remained symbolic leaders of the Islamic world, but real political and military authority slipped from their grasp. The army was increasingly composed of Turkic slave soldiers, Mamluks, who often wielded more power than the rulers they served. Court intrigues, corruption, and succession disputes weakened the central government. Still, Baghdad endured as a cultural and religious center. Even as political power waned, scholars continued to teach, poets to write, and scientists to explore. The city remained a destination for pilgrims, traders, and intellectuals. But a new threat was rising, one that no one in Baghdad could have fully anticipated. From the vast steppes of Central Asia, a new empire was emerging, the Mongol Empire. Founded by Genghis Khan in the early 13th century, it was the largest contiguous land empire in history. Ruthless, disciplined, and highly mobile, the Mongol armies swept across Asia, conquering China, Persia, and much of the Islamic world. By the 1250s, the Mongols were knocking at Baghdad's gates. Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis and brother of the great Khan Monka, was tasked with subduing the Islamic world. He brought with him a massive army, estimated at over 100,000 soldiers, along with siege engines, Chinese engineers, and a reputation for utter destruction. Hulagu had already destroyed the assassins Nizari Ismailis at Alamut and captured major cities like Nishapur and Merv, where entire populations were massacred. His message was clear: surrender or be annihilated. When the Mongols left, Baghdad was a shadow of its former self. The city's infrastructure was destroyed, its economy collapsed. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled for over 500 years, was effectively finished. Although later Mongol rulers, particularly under the Ilkhanate, would convert to Islam and rebuild parts of the city, Baghdad never regained its former glory. The intellectual center of the Islamic world shifted to Cairo, under the Mamluk Sultanate, which had successfully repelled the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260. Damascus, Tunis, and later Istanbul would also rise as new centers of learning. But the trauma of 1258 lingered. For the Muslim world, the fall of Baghdad was not just a political defeat, it was a spiritual and psychological catastrophe. The Caliph was not merely a ruler, he was the commander of the faithful, the symbolic leader of the global Muslim community. His execution marked the end of an era of unity and divine legitimacy. Moreover, the destruction of knowledge struck at the heart of Islamic identity. Islam had always placed a high value on learning, with the Prophet Muhammad saying, "Seek knowledge, even as far as China." The Abbasid era had embodied this ideal. To see that legacy erased in a week was a profound blow. In the heart of the Middle East, along the winding banks of the Tigris River, once stood a city so magnificent, so advanced, so intellectually radiant, that it was hailed as the crown jewel of human civilization, the city of Baghdad. At its peak, it was not only the political and spiritual center of the Islamic world, but also the brightest beacon of knowledge, science, and culture on earth. Scholars from across continents journeyed to its libraries, poets recited verses beneath its domes, and astronomers charted the stars from its observatories. It was a city where philosophy met faith, where ancient wisdom was preserved and expanded, and where the future of human thought was being written. Baghdad was more than a capital. It was a symbol of what humanity could achieve when curiosity, tolerance, and power converged. For over 5 centuries, it flourished as the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, a golden age of enlightenment that would shape the course of world history. But in the winter of 1258, this beacon of civilization was extinguished in a matter of days. The Mongol armies led by Hulagu Khan descended upon the city like a storm from the east, and in one brutal week they reduced the greatest city of its time to ashes. The libraries burned, the scholars were slaughtered, and the Tigris River ran black with ink as centuries of accumulated knowledge were cast into its waters. This is not just the story of a city's destruction, it is the story of how one of the most advanced civilizations in human history was erased in an instant, and how its legacy still echoes across the centuries. The fall of Baghdad was not merely a military conquest, it was a cultural catastrophe, a turning point in history, and a wound that has never fully healed in the collective memory of the Muslim world. To understand the magnitude of this tragedy, we must first journey back to the beginning, to the rise of Baghdad, to the golden age it ushered in, and to the forces that made its fall not only possible but inevitable. In January 1258, Hulagu's forces surrounded Baghdad. The city's defenses, once formidable, were now outdated. The Tigris River, which had once protected the city, became a trap. The Abbasid Caliph, al-Mustasim, proved indecisive. He refused to surrender, believing in the city's divine protection and underestimating the Mongol threat. He reportedly told his advisors, "God will not allow the holy city of the Caliphate to fall." But God did not intervene. On January 29, 1258, after a 2-week siege, the Mongols breached the walls. What followed was not a battle, it was a systematic massacre. For 7 days, the city was subjected to unspeakable violence. Soldiers looted, raped, and killed indiscriminately. Palaces were burned. Mosques were desecrated. The Caliph himself was captured. According to legend, Hulagu had him rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses, a method meant to avoid spilling royal blood, which Mongol tradition forbade. Tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, were slaughtered. Some estimates suggest as many as 800,000 to 1 million people died, though modern historians debate the exact figure. What is certain is that Baghdad's population was decimated. But the most devastating loss was cultural. The House of Wisdom, the greatest library of the age, was destroyed. Its vast collection of manuscripts, works on medicine, astronomy, philosophy, mathematics, and literature was either burned or thrown into the Tigris River. So many books were cast into the water that contemporary accounts claim the river ran black with ink. Scholars were executed. Libraries were reduced to rubble. Centuries of accumulated knowledge, some of it irreplaceable, were lost forever. One account, written by the historian Atam al-Juvaini, who accompanied the Mongols, described the scene. They carried off the books and threw them into the water. The Tigris was colored black with the ink of the manuscripts and red with the blood of the scholars. This was not just conquest, it was cultural genocide. Despite the devastation, not all was lost. Some scholars had fled before the siege, carrying manuscripts with them. Copies of key texts had already been distributed across the Islamic world. The works of Al-Razi, Al-Khwarizmi and Ibn Sina survived, not in Baghdad but in Cairo, Cordoba and beyond. And crucially, this knowledge eventually made its way to Europe. Through translations in Spain and Sicily, Arabic texts were rendered into Latin. European scholars in places like Paris, Bologna, and Oxford studied the works of Muslim scientists and philosophers. The Renaissance, often seen as a purely European rebirth, was in fact deeply indebted to the intellectual legacy of Baghdad. The scientific method, algebra, optics, and advances in medicine all passed through the House of Wisdom before reaching the West. In this sense, the light of Baghdad was not extinguished, it was refracted. It survived in the universities of medieval Europe, in the works of thinkers like Roger Bacon and Thomas Aquinas, and in the foundations of modern science. Yet the Muslim world never fully recovered from the trauma of 1258. The loss of institutional knowledge, the fragmentation of political power, and the psychological blow of such a sudden collapse contributed to a long period of intellectual stagnation in many parts of the Islamic world. Even today, the fall of Baghdad is remembered as a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fragile civilization can be, how quickly knowledge can vanish, and how easily greatness can be undone by arrogance, division, and external force. By the 9th century, under the rule of caliphs like Harun al-Rashid and al-Mamun, Baghdad had evolved into a true global city. With a population estimated at over 1 million people, it was one of the largest and most diverse cities on earth, surpassing even Constantinople and Chang'an in size and sophistication. The city pulsed with life. Markets overflowed with spices from India, silks from China, and incense from Arabia. Caravans arrived daily, bringing goods and ideas from distant lands. Scholars from Spain, Persia, India, and even China gathered in its madrasas and libraries. Religious tolerance relative to the standards of the age allowed Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and Muslims to coexist and collaborate. But the true engine of Baghdad's greatness was the House of Wisdom, Bayt al-Hikma, established by Caliph al-Mamun around 830 CE. More than a library, it was a vast academy of translation, research, and innovation. Here, teams of scholars, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and pagan, worked together to translate the great works of antiquity from Greek, Syriac, Persian, and Sanskrit into Arabic. They preserved the writings of Aristotle, Plato, Galen, Ptolemy, Euclid, and many others, texts that had been lost or forgotten in Europe. But they did not merely translate, they expanded upon them. Muslim scholars questioned, debated, and built new knowledge on the foundations of the past. In mathematics, Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra, his name giving us the word algorithm, and introduced the Hindu-Arabic numeral system to the world. In medicine, Al-Razi wrote comprehensive medical encyclopedias, distinguishing between smallpox and measles and pioneering clinical observation. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, though later than the Abbasid peak, authored the Canon of Medicine, a medical text so influential it was used in European universities for over 600 years. Astronomers in Baghdad refined Ptolemaic models, calculated the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy, and compiled star catalogs. Engineers designed water clocks, automata, and early forms of robotics. Philosophers like Al-Kindi and Al-Farabi synthesized Greek philosophy with Islamic theology, laying the groundwork for later thinkers in both the Islamic and Christian worlds. Baghdad was not just preserving knowledge, it was creating it, and it was doing so at a time when much of Europe was fragmented, feudal, and intellectually isolated. Baghdad was founded in the year 760 CE by Caliph al-Mansur, the second ruler of the Abbasid dynasty. The Abbasids had recently overthrown the Umayyad Caliphate after a bloody civil war, marking a profound shift in the political and cultural direction of the Islamic world. Unlike the Umayyads, who had centered their power in Damascus and maintained strong Arab aristocratic traditions, the Abbasids sought a new beginning, one that embraced a more inclusive, cosmopolitan vision of Islam. Al-Mansur chose a strategic location on the west bank of the Tigris River, midway between the great cities of Ctesiphon and Babylon, in what is now modern-day Iraq. The site was not only accessible to trade routes connecting India, Persia, the Mediterranean, and Central Asia, but also lay in fertile agricultural land, capable of supporting a massive urban population. The city was originally designed as a circular metropolis, a revolutionary urban plan for its time. Known as the Round City of Baghdad, it was meticulously laid out with concentric walls, radiating avenues, and fortified gates. At its center stood the Caliph's palace and the Grand Mosque, symbolizing the unity of political and religious authority. Surrounding them were administrative buildings, markets, and residential quarters. This geometric precision was not just architectural, it was symbolic of order, harmony, and divine governance. But Baghdad was more than a marvel of engineering. From its inception, it was conceived as a capital of knowledge and culture. Al-Mansur himself was a patron of learning, fluent in Arabic, Persian, and Greek, and deeply interested in astronomy, mathematics, and statecraft. He invited scholars, translators, and scientists from across the empire to settle in the new capital, laying the foundation for what would become the most advanced intellectual center of the medieval world. In the 21st century, as we face new threats to knowledge, censorship, misinformation, the erosion of education, and the weaponization of history, the story of Baghdad remains urgently relevant. It reminds us that libraries are not just buildings, they are repositories of human memory, that scholars are not just academics, they are the guardians of progress, and that civilizations do not fall because of external enemies alone, but because of internal decay, corruption, complacency, and the failure to protect what is most valuable. The black ink in the Tigris River was not just a symbol of lost books, it was a symbol of lost potential. How many cures, discoveries, and ideas were erased that week? How many voices were silenced before they could speak? And yet the story is not one of pure despair, it is also a story of resilience. The fact that so much knowledge survived, that it traveled across continents and centuries, is a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity. Today, Baghdad still stands. Though scarred by war, occupation, and instability, it remains a city of poets, teachers, and dreamers. And around the world, efforts continue to reclaim and restore the legacy of the Islamic Golden Age through digitization projects, academic research, and cultural revival. The fall of Baghdad was a tragedy, but it was not the end, because as long as we remember what was lost and strive to rebuild what was broken, the light of that ancient city will never truly go out. Baghdad was more than a city. It was a promise that humanity could rise above war and ignorance, that faith and reason could coexist, that knowledge could be a force for unity rather than division. Its destruction in 1258 was a warning, its survival in memory is a hope, and in an age where information flows faster than ever but wisdom feels harder to find, we would do well to look back at the banks of the Tigris, at the river that once ran black with ink, and ask ourselves, what are we building and what are we willing to protect? For history does not repeat itself, but it often echoes, and the fall of Baghdad still speaks.